Do I think Bibi Netanyahu is evil enough to sacrifice his own people? Yes, a million times over.
About 70 to 75% in polls say there are no innocents in Gaza.
Mm.
For the people of Israel, Gazans are vermin.
What's been happening in Gaza is a tremendous evil.
Candace Owens and Norman Finkelstein just exposed the truth about Israel's genocide in Gaza, and in this clip, they get into why this goes far deeper than Netanyahu himself, and how much public support Netanyahu and his regime have to carry out this policy on the bankroll of the United States. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Truly unbelievable. It's actually quite scary because every 15 feet there's an armed person. They take their security very seriously. Now people are speaking out, and I think a lot more is going to come out because they have been censoring. Bibi has been lying, censoring, editing transcripts. I've been following the case against him pretty closely because there are Israeli publications that have been documenting everything. Obviously, he's not well liked by the people in Israel. They were taking to the streets to protest him, but it is almost unbelievable that circumstance. Plus, when you add to the fact they intercepted a document, right, way earlier that said 200 hostages were going to be taken by Hamas. It's almost unbelievable that they ignored everything, plus Egypt warning them that something was happening on the border. I have never bought that there was not that it took place. Of course it took place and it was terrible, but that it wasn't intentionally allowed. And I truly believe that in my soul after I saw the footage prior to October 7th of Bibi Netanyahu. I'm not sure if you've seen this, but he thinks he's off record. He says, put the cameras down, like off record. And he starts detailing a plan where he's like, we got to hit Gaza so hard that they can't go back. And so they sort of needed a pretext of sorts. And do I think Bibi Netanyahu is evil enough to sacrifice his own people? Yes, a million times over. What's been happening in Gaza is a tremendous evil. And I don't think we will truly know the full picture of how evil it was until Bibi Netanyahu is removed from power and we're able to see the transcripts that he's blocking of the conversations he had that day with his cabinet.
Yeah, interesting. Supporting this is actually a lot of evidence. For instance, we have this article, Candace Owens mentioned this, references that Egypt tipped off Israel 3 days in advance of October 7th, saying something big was happening. This was even discussed on the House floor in the United States, but this came from Egyptian intelligence warning them of this. This is also supported by another mainstream news article that happened, about a month and a half later. This one from the New York Times. I usually wouldn't cite that, but even the New York Times, which is generally very supportive of Israel, is pointing out that Israel knew about this attack plan more than a year in advance. This is something that was widely published, that Israeli intelligence was aware that this type of strike involving this type of strategy would be used. So this really supports Candace's argument that there is at the very least foreknowledge. Now, whether it was bungled or allowed to happen, that's a matter for debate. I can see, I guess, both sides of that, but it's very clear that Netanyahu wanted to carry out this policy in Gaza for a long time. That is the case.
Look, obviously, there are areas of interpretation here, and I don't want to pretend as if I have a monopoly on the truth. If you look back at 9/11, okay, our own September 11th, if you look back, and there were many people who wrote at the time, there were a lot of people in the national security establishment who had reports that there was going to be an attack. They came in, the reports came in, no question about that. You have to remember, when you are a state the size of the United States and the power of the United States, you're going to be getting each day 10,000 intelligence reports about possible terrorist attack here, possible terrorist attack there. The United States has a huge number of bases around the world. So you're always getting reports. But a intelligence establishment has to rank threats. And they ranked the Osama bin Laden threat low or lower then it should have been ranked.
Yeah, he's right about that. And the U.S. government did have warnings of 9/11 too. This memo that was later declassified came from August 6th. Bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S. And did it lay out every single detail of 9/11? No. But it talked about some of the basic specifics, including the fact that there were Al-Qaeda members training to fly airplanes. So this is not something that should just be discounted. This seems to be similar to that case in Israel as well, where there was possible foreknowledge here. It seems to be very concrete. What they did with that, or whether they chose to ignore that, it's another question.
In the case of Israel, here we're free to disagree. Israel it's a Jewish supremacist state. That's not my opinion, okay? So the head of Israel's main human rights organization, it's called B'Tselem, B'Tselem. And the head of Israel's human rights, B'Tselem, this is a few years ago, it's a guy named Haggai Elad. Very decent guy. I've never met him. I'm not sure if he ever wanted to meet me. But decent guy. He was a Harvard-trained PhD in physics. Serious fellow. Okay? And he put out a little report, or he was the executive director when B'Tselem put out a report. It was probably 10, 15 years ago now. 10. My memory's bad for time now. And he said, here are the basic facts. There's one state, from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. There's no Israel and occupied territories. There's just one state. And he said, that state, its foundation is Jewish supremacy. There are different levels of Jewish supremacy. It's different for the situation of Arabs, Palestinians living in Israel, Palestinians living in the West Bank, Palestinians living in Gaza, and Palestinian refugees. It's different levels. But the foundation is it's a Jewish supremacist state. Now, why do I mention it? Because for the people of Israel, Gazans are vermin. They're garbage. They're human refuse.
Once you realize that is true according to the Likudniks and most of the prevailing majority of that coalition in Israel, all things seem to make sense, and it's sad. It's sick and it's twisted, but he's exactly right about that. And this goes way back to Israel's founding and kind of the arch pioneer of Zionism. Theodore Herzl himself considered that Israel should be a homeland for, quote, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. And that's how they view the surrounding peoples generally. It's not every single Israeli, but that is the prevailing Zionist thought, and it comes from the very beginnings of the modern Zionist state. It's something that David Ben-Gurion carried forward, certainly Menachem Begin, the former terrorist, did, and now you're seeing it play out by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Katz and Netanyahu before our eyes.
And so when you're getting intelligence reports from Gaza that they're going to launch an operation, the Israeli intelligence establishment, this thing, what are you talking about? They're going to outsmart us. They are going to trick us with our surveillance, with our technology, with our IDF. This vermin is going to be able to pull this off. So I think they did the same thing as our Bush administration did with Osama bin Laden. They put it on a low priority. They were shocked that Hamas was able, after October 7th, they were shocked that Hamas was able to pull it off.
Dave Smith, who's a good friend of mine, believes, has your perspective. He does have your perspective.
Yeah, one last point on this, because, and I want to hear you out. You said Israelis hate Netanyahu. I don't think that's true at all. Netanyahu is the longest sitting prime minister in Israeli history. If you follow it, as I do, and you're not obliged to, that's not your niche. Every few years, they report Netanyahu's going. Netanyahu's going. Netanyahu's out. Netanyahu's finished. No, he's not. And you know why? Because he's an obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. And that's Israeli society. Obnoxious, narcissistic Jewish supremacist. When they see him, they see themselves. So there may be quarrels on this policy issue and that policy issue, but at the end of the day, they keep voting for him.
Yeah, he's generally right about this. Actually, Netanyahu's approval rating has wavered several times and ebbs and flows since October 7th. I've seen it as low as in the 30s. It got down to like 33% by big polls in Israel. And by the way, Israelis are the most polled people on the globe, more polled than Americans are, actually. And recently, though, his approval rating has climbed higher. And I think it's because, he was willing to, take public pressure into account to agree to this ceasefire in Gaza, which is really a quasi-ceasefire. They've killed over 100 Palestinians there since the ceasefire began, and suppressed aid. They were supposed to send 600 aid trucks in. They only sent 300. That's been widely acknowledged as well. The great hero of antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp, reports on this very regularly. But there are polls now that are showing that he has, up to 50% now in polls. So his polls approval ratings are getting better, and it looks like he's going to run for re-election. So I have to agree with Finkelstein. He is relatively popular, all things considered. He remains the most popular candidate in the field that is expected to run right now. And I think it's because the success he's found in manipulating Americans, and specifically American presidents, especially Trump, to acknowledge the Golan Heights, to move the embassy to Jerusalem such that it would preclude a Palestinian state by, the idea that Eastern Jerusalem would be part of a future Palestinian state. That might be off the table because of that move. Joining in the war with Iran, which is, counterintuitive to what America's stated foreign policy goals were, to sign the Abraham Accords, to give them something like $26 billion since October 7th, all this stuff he's been successfully procuring for this greater Israel project, for the dreams of the rigid Zionists. And, many people like that. I hate to say it. I think that's ludicrous. I think that's ghastly, but that is true.
And they vote for him because Netanyahu is not just the face of, he's the reality of Israeli society.
Yeah.
When they try so hard, the people who are critical of Israel, people like Bernie Sanders, who's been not bad in recent years, he has his limits, but he's been okay. He always tries to laser beam Netanyahu. That's not true. The problem is not Netanyahu. The problem is the whole of Israeli society. If you look at the polls, half of Israeli Jews believe Israel should commit a genocide in Gaza.
Wow.
That's what the polls show.
And he's not joking. There was a specific question asked in that way to Israelis of whether they support it. It didn't mince words on this, and it was supported by about half the populace. This is exactly true. Don't believe me on it. Just Google that. That is true.
About 70 to 75% in polls say there are no innocents in Gaza. No innocents.
And there's nothing but children.
Yeah. No innocents in Gaza, half of the population being Jewish.
And think of that. That conforms exactly to what Brian Mast said in a famous tweet, soon after October 7th, when he said there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. And guess what? When Candace Owens pushed back against that, that's when a lot of the backlash toward Candace Owens happened, is when she took issue with that, as she well should have, because that is genocidal language. It just totally is. And it also conforms to what Randy Fine said when people would link, pictures of children being plucked up from rubble that had been killed by the IDF. And they said, hey, how can you sleep at night? He said, just fine, thank you. That is the Zionist political class in America and how they behave. Norm is right, and it does go far beyond Netanyahu. This is not a Netanyahu-only issue, so to make him the only scapegoat is just absurd, especially when you have people like Smotrich and Katz and Ben-Gvir in your government too, and there's overwhelming support amongst the populace to unleash this genocide in Gaza. Does that mean every single Israeli is to blame? Absolutely not. Does that mean every single Jew is to blame? Absolutely not. But these policies, sadly, are supported by the overwhelming amount of the populace.
The former Israeli, or the current Israeli opposition leader, he said that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, they kill children as a hobby. As a hobby.
He's right. Yair Golan is the one that said that. He's the leader of the left-wing opposition party in Israel. He said that, but I think he still supports generally the war against Iran and the general vision of this Greater Israel Project. That's the opposition left-wing leader. And Netanyahu is the right-wing leader that controls the government. It's a coalition with, rigid Zionists all around in different parties, but that is the case.
Yeah, I've seen some videos of like how proud they are when they kill a child, and it's really dark. But also, I will say, you can see psychological conditioning, as in their viewpoints on the Palestinians. You can tell is being nurtured from the time that they're a child. And I ran
totally agree
into
with that.
somebody who left Israel, moved to Tennessee recently, and I ran into him at a farmer's market, and he said, "I absolutely love you, and I want you to know that we learn this stuff from the time we are
I
children."
totally agree with that.
He said, so he left, and he said, from the time we are children, we learn to hate. So he kind of broke a psychological barrier to get there, obviously, as an Israeli. But you are correct. I mean, and that's why psychology really is the name of the game. When you're talking about religious fanaticism or any other fanaticism, I want to say also, there is an element of psychology. And that is why in my capacity now, that's actually gotten a lot of trouble talking about the history of Sigmund Freud. But if you want to really speak about what is happening with psychology, propaganda, PR, he's the father of all of that. And going back and tracing those roots, it's very scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Candace is right on this. I have no problem believing that Israelis are inundated with that kind of propaganda from the cradle to the grave. So are Americans, by the way. I grew up parroting the neocon Zionist lines that Israel has a right to defend itself and it's a beacon for democracy, the only state of its kind in the Middle East, surrounded by barbaric nations. And all of that is so absurd. And it's not right to continue in 2025 to say Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, that's not really the issue here, man. If we're talking about the Great Lebowski, the Chinaman's not the issue, man. What the issue is stopping the senseless slaughter of children by the thousands. By about 20,000 children have died. And about 100,000, via conservative estimates have died. Doesn't speak anything about the amount of displaced peoples. Despite all this propaganda, thankfully Americans are starting to wake up, and I have no doubt that the propaganda is really all they have. And once that starts to crumble, you see them acting erratically. That's why we're getting this kind of policies now. They see the door shutting on the Greater Israel Project with so much American support peeling away now for really the first time in my lifetime, for sure. And that's a source of hope for me, that we might not have to deal with these kind of backward Israel first policies our entire lives.
I mean, these were really deeply dark people who were trying to cover up their own crimes. And that is the reality, without going off on a tangent here. But you are correct. And I think I would like to hear your perspective on how the tentacles of that Jewish supremacy have manifested, and you are actually, and I'm sure you wouldn't refer yourself as a victim, but I'm saying what happened to you in your life, the circumstances around what happened in your academic career is actually reflected in the Jewish supremacist. These are the perspectives that you have to have if you're going to be welcome into these spaces that we control. How did that happen?
Well, I would want to make the following points. Number one, the Jewish showing since October 7th, it's actually, I'm talking about broadly, American Jewish showing. It's actually not been bad. I'm actually very surprised. So, for example, somebody sent me this, let's see, The most recent poll from the Washington Post, it found that 61% of American Jews say Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. 40% say Israel has committed genocide there.
Would you just call them anti-Semitic for that? Because non-Jews get called anti-Semitic for that all the time. Actually, Jews do too. They call Norman Finkelstein, the son of Holocaust survivors, anti-Semitic. Just probably for reading those stats, he will be called that. Thankfully, more Americans are seeing through this, and when everything is anti-Semitic, nothing is, in the same way that when everything is racism, nothing is racism. They're just eradicating the meaning of that word and making it into something that just Americans see through. The wool has been taken away from their eyes. But that's, I'm so glad to hear that from him, that those are the stats. I would have expected those numbers to be a little bit lower. But yeah, I mean, this is saying whenever you hear, these things being brought up as war crimes or genocide, it just invites automatic accusations of anti-Semitism. But it's like the majority of Jews in America think that it's war crimes. Almost half of Jews in America think it's a genocide. So that's where we are.
And about half are opposing what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's about 10% less than the American people in general, but it's not a bad showing. And we should recognize that.
And I say it on my show all the time. I say, it's important to recognize that. Not only that, because I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, so I grew up in a very Jewish area. And I always remark, these are not the Jewish people that you went to school with, right? We're talking about these hubs of power, DC, Hollywood. And so it sounds like when you're reading the news, every Jewish person must hold this perspective, and that is not reality.
I want to say, Candace, I'm grateful that you say that.
Absolutely. And some of the best critics of Israel are Jewish. I mean, you have Dave Smith and Jeffrey Sachs and Aaron Mattei and Max Blumenthal and Glenn Greenwald and Katie Halper and Noam Chomsky, who has a long history of opposing the Israeli regime and the U.S. connection to it. Some of the best critics outside of that amount of the populace, which is considerable, are very critical of Israel. It's something it's worth pointing out, and not just as a shield against anti-Semitism, to point out, like, hey, it's not just about an ethnicity or a region or a religion or anything like that. It's just reasonable people who know murder and mass atrocities when they see it. Imagine that.
I believe that's factually correct.
Yeah.
If you remember the first demonstrations against the genocide in Gaza, the biggest ones were led by Jews at Grand Central Station, at the Statue of Liberty. It was deeply moving. And they were very active. Jewish students were very active in the encampments around the country.
They were. And they didn't get the same showcasing in the media. They tried to pretty much squash it, but it was there, and that's important to state.
Within that context, where, as I say, the results of the polls aren't bad, in my opinion. Within that context, you use the word hubs. It is a fact, and one has to, in my opinion, face it because it's having real consequences. There's a Jewish supremacist billionaire class which is exerting a huge amount of power and muscle up front and behind the scenes.
Yeah, no doubt that's true, and we'll let that serve until the teaser for my next video on this, but he's exactly right. You see this wealthy Zionist class of Larry Ellisons and Seth Dillons and, Barry Weisses of the world, buying up TikTok and Paramount and CBS, and Andreessen Horowitz also helping Larry Ellison buy out TikTok. You have these influencers being paid $7,000 a post on glaringly obvious Hasbara propaganda that it's just become a meme, and I'm so glad it is. $7,000 a post, because this has been uncovered by several journalists, including the heroic Max Blumenthal, pointing out that, all these influencers are getting paid by Israel. It's, a desperation attempt to win back a lot of the support that they've lost. They've lost by having their closest cutouts and carve-outs in the United States, like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin and Laura Loomer, just double down on everything Israel does, including the atrocities, while also claiming that, hey, Judaism is indistinguishable from the nation of Israel. If you do both of those things, it explains the 50-point swing we've seen in regard to sympathy toward the Palestinians since October 7th. It's been a 50-point swing. Just imagine that kind of swing on almost any other issue, including, taxes or tariffs or wars or the surveillance state. It just seems unprecedented. And I'm so glad this conversation is happening between two heroes, as far as I see it, on Israel. The older generation, the academic scholar that is Norman Finkelstein, and all the academic works he's produced on this. And actually, he's one of the biggest experts on the German Holocaust as well. And, a bright young influencer in the form of Candace Owens, who was not always on the adversarial bandwagon toward Israel. She was once a big supporter of Israel, as was I, if you can believe it. I was a diehard Zionist. Thankfully, I woke up in 2004, but I was doubling down on this stuff too. I would never gotten in depth into this subject until years later, and that showed because I was so ignorant of many of these things. But that is the truth. People can change. There is a redemption arc for people, and I dare say there's a redemption arc for America in general. We need to rid ourselves of AIPAC's influence, the Israel lobby, get our troops away from the Middle East, stop getting bogged down in all the catastrophes that the best founders warned us about, like Thomas Jefferson, who said in his first inaugural address that his American creed, as far as he saw it, his vision was peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. And that includes Israel. I know that's a sacred cow regime to many people, but it includes Israel. And when George Washington in his farewell address said, we need to beware of foreign entanglements. They always make America inherit all the enemies of our allies. And what could be more true than that? These two seem like prophets. And man, I am just so heartened to see this dialogue play out, hoping this ceasefire lasts a long time. I know it's already been violated, but, any reprieve in mass slaughter is a good thing. Anyone should, be happy about that kind of reprieve. I don't think any of the core issues have been solved between the Palestinians and Israelis, and frankly, I don't think that will happen unless there is a two-state solution, which is not... I'm never really for state solutions in anything, but when compared to a genocide, yeah, I'm going to favor that kind of solution. But anyway, this conversation was amazing. I'm so glad it happened. These two people are commendable. They're full of virtue, and they come from very different sides of the political aisle, with Finkelstein being something of, I think, a Trotskyite. He calls himself an old-school communist. And Candace Owens being, from the conservative right. It's very refreshing to see this kind of single-issue coalition play out like this in respectful dialogue that, isn't just reduced to scorn at people and yelling anti-Semitism and don't platform this guy. This was productive, but I do want to hear from you. What do you think about this? Was this productive? Did you learn anything here? Were you surprised about anything? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Candace Owens. Thank you, Candace. I'm so glad you did this interview. It's so awesome. And if you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can click the join button below to do that. And in return for that good deed, I will give you access to all of my videos, the members only ones, before they go live to the general public on YouTube. Also, if you want a free copy of my first book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below. It'll just shoot you off to my site, libertyvault.net. You'll plug in your email. I'll send it right to you in your email. No obligation, totally for free. It tells the tale about how America went from a decentralized League of States into a centralized world empire that got into entangling alliances, especially with Israel, to the detriment of American citizens and patriots everywhere. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.